Well, good morning everyone.
Good morning everyone.
It'd be good to do some introductions. So first of all, I'm Scott Brennan and we are here in the White House garden on the holy island of Lindisfarne.
I'm Aaron Elder, lead a church in Edinburgh, and I'm here actually retreating but pulled onto camera for this by Scott.
And I'm Ray Simpson. I used to live in this house and I'm one of the founders of the community of Aidan and Hilda.
And we are gathered here today to begin a little series of conversations on the actual person of St. Aidan himself. Ray wrote this book called St. Aidan's Way of Mission, and recently with Pete Gregg coming down from Iona, there's been quite a lot of interest in the way of Aidan as a man, as a person, as a mission, and as a model of who he is and what he did, and just even as momentum. You know, it created this missional movement which all of us at some point in our lives has been involved in missional church planting, discipleship. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a quick overview today, isn't that right, Mr.
Yes.
Simpson? But what we thought we'd do is Aaron's going to tell us he had a little bit of an experience walking across the Pilgrim's Posts yesterday. So do you want to tell us what happened?
Yeah, and I guess I'm also a beginner to this, so I can ask the daft laddie questions and sort of say, who is Aidan? Because I really don't know that much. So I was walking across, and in the midst of some other things and various things I was discerning, I had a real sense as I was walking over, and I think because I was walking in the footsteps of those who first walked and arrived on this island, there was a sense of, especially though, to follow the way of Aidan.
And did that come as a thought?
Yeah, it just came as a thought, and I think the little things I already know about Aidan resonate. So there's something about the missional impulse to go, the kind of apostolic sending, the planting something of some kind that then equips and raises up and sends out others. All of those things I really kind of connect to, but I guess beyond that I don't know much more about Aidan and his story. You know, he talks about, the man, the mission, the momentum, what that actually looked like, and I guess as a pattern to follow as I think about that. But yeah, that was the sense I had of follow Aidan.
Follow Aidan.
And I don't think it was just get to the other side before the tide comes up. I think it was...
Oh, that's a good idea.
It was almost, what does it look like to follow in his footsteps in some measure? So, yeah.
Well, we have Mr. Simpson here, so I think what would your first response, Ray, perhaps be when someone like Aaron is asking that question?
Well, Aidan speaks to me, and I think is the saint for the British and Irish Isles and for the whole English-speaking world today. He speaks to me first because of his character. It wasn't his model, it was who he was as a person.
Right.
And then his model was a tremendous model for us to follow. There were other missions before him, and they were what modern jargon we call colonial. They imposed their own culture. They didn't know they were doing it properly.
Right.
And it required the locals to come out of their environment to some centre and hear a message in a foreign language. Aidan refused to ride a horse. He was given a top quality horse by the king, Christ-like King Oswald. But Aidan realised that only landowners and warriors have horses.
Right.
He wanted to walk like Jesus did for 3 years through the streets of Judea. He wanted to walk with the peasants, the poor, people who couldn't read. And so he refused the horse. He went with 12 brothers from Iona. Half of them he formed into a faith-sharing team. And his rule was, say hello and get to know anybody you meet. Wave to them and be interested in them. Don't impose anything on them. Ask them to tell their stories, what they're interested in.
Right.
If they tell them and invite you to say, well, why have you come? Then you can tell them the gospel stories.
Right.
And he said, don't read the gospels, learn them by heart, memorize them and the Psalms, so they come out of your heart. And so they began to become friends and be loved by the poorest people in ordinary villages. But his second great model really was to build a model of the kingdom of God on earth, a colony of heaven, to use the Roman Empire idea, colony. And so he chose Lindisfarne, or was given it by the king, and built the first monastic village really on Lindisfarne, but it was the first of many others.
And so there's this idea of being sent,
yes,
but not arriving with the answer, which is very much ties into the things that you and I have talked about in terms of church planting now.
Contextualisation,
Does that make,
incarnational
do you
mission.
connect with what Ray has said there?
he loved the people, he listened to them.
And he removed the cultural barriers
Yes,
that would hinder them. He did all he could to,
Yeah.
and I get even learning the Gospels rather than
Yeah.
just reading the Gospels
Yeah.
was about somehow putting it into language and ways
so.
that,
and I think the fact that he took, I mean, from an American evangelical reached the greatest number in the shortest time mission
Right.
ideology, that would be ridiculous.
So
But-
he didn't come with a product, if you like.
He didn't come with a productivity
Yeah.
guide. He actually, but Bede, the historian, tells us that he lived what he talked about. He had gentleness, patience, and he said, because there'd been a failed mission from Iona, one of the failed missions from a Roman mission in previous
This was
regime.
Corman, wasn't it?
Corman, and yes, he said, give them the milk. And I think he meant the milk from a mother's breast, inside the mother, going inside an infant. And he had the milk of kindness, the milk of patience, the milk of gentleness.
Right.
Yeah. So he was 100% kosher product, if you like. You know, he lived what he talked about.
Although we were feeding Aaron burgers yesterday, weren't we?
I'm sorry about
You
that.
made that joke at the time, yeah. You did.
Yes.
Yeah, I can handle the meat. That's good.
So what you've discussed there is really that the man was the message,
Yes,
and it was indigenous
yes.
and authentic.
It was but you see, a lot of modern evangelism, including Celtic stuff, is nationalist.
Right.
John Knox said, "Lord, give me Scotland or I die." He was a Scot. But he was willing to lay down his life for his own people.
Right.
Aidan was an Irish Scot who laid down his life for these unlikable people with a totally alien culture,
Yes.
who were not nice in many ways. And he laid down his life for an unlikable people who are different to his own.
And actually that brings me kind of onto the model, if you like, because there is a danger, particularly in the UK, when we think about doing mission and planting churches, that we go to people like us.
We reach our own.
Yeah.
And we've tried not to do that in our own experience, haven't we? And that's a real challenge. And I suppose that's why for Aidan, he has to have worked on the inner self.
Yeah.
Because there would have been prejudices and bias and preferences that he dealt with.
And one of the things he did, he must have had a huge area to cover. The king wanted him to do 101 things. And he goes to a farm island on a retreat for a whole week in the first 6 months of his arrival.
Okay.
Now that says us something too.
Yes.
He
So-
killed the lust to succeed and achieve 100 targets before tomorrow.
Wow. And that's a real danger, especially when your goal is to make a difference, isn't it? And if you're wired a certain way to be more apostolic and to actually achieve things, that's a danger, isn't it?
Yeah, that kind of drivenness
Yeah.
and striving become the...
Yeah.
So he came with a different mindset, didn't he?
Yeah. But he did come with the vision of building what I call monastic villages of God. And so the first school for Saxon boys was here on Lindisfarne. He got 12 of them to come. We don't know a lot about some of them, but we know quite a bit about some.
There were 4 brothers, weren't there?
4 brothers, Chad and Sed,
Yeah.
and 2 others, yeah. And they went, they evangelized all along the River Tay, and there are bells in memory of them and sites they evangelized. and they said went all the way down to within walking distance of the River Thames, because they
And is he not called the apostle to the Saxons down there?
to the East Saxons,
East
yes,
Saxons.
Essex, Greater London we call it today. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah, he was, and he was invited by King Sigebert, who was a friend of the king here in Northumbria. So,
And so, like, you know, you're talking about a model,
yeah,
and we're not talking about a product here, we're talking about a way of life, aren't
yes, we are.
Very different.
Yeah.
And it came through alliances of friendship. I mean, it was mainly people like Oswald, who was the king, who Aidan was the best friend of, and who Aidan greatly respected.
Yes.
But he worked with people in charge as well as the lowest of the low. That was quite something.
And so that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because you've got an Irishman
Yeah,
coming to be mentored in Scotland
yep,
and released by Iona
yep.
to England, which
Yep.
is a powerful image, isn't it?
Well, the Saxons, yeah.
The Saxons,
Yeah.
the first English-speaking
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't England at that point.
no.
Well, Northumbria would have been all the way from the Humber to the Forth, wouldn't it?
Yes,
Yes.
and indeed it went up to the River Tay at one point.
Really?
Yep,
Yeah, because they did mission there.
yep, yep.
And so, you know, we talked about the man, the mission, but there is a momentum that's very attractive, isn't there? There's something about just the power to keep moving forward. What do you think was at the heart of that?
Well, when the Pope sent some Syrian guy to be called the Archbishop of Canterbury and to try and create the first church among English speakers, he went to the humblest guy he could think of, which was Chad, who was one of the first door brothers at Aidan School, who tried to model himself on Aidan, and he wouldn't ride a horse. But Theodore said, look, you've got a huge area, and he physically picked him up and put him on a horse. You've got to ride to reach all these people. But Chad made the hearth of his big diocese of Mercia a prayer cells, not a cathedral.
Okay.
So he got monks who prayed every day in his
Right,
prayers. That was
right.
the heartbeat of it.
Yeah. So really, that's key, isn't it? The role and place of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a danger when we're motivated by success or metrics of some kind that we actually miss that whole point, don't we? That prayer should be
yeah,
key.
and you know, Aidan was very keen on evangelism, but he said to people who wanted to plant new churches, don't put a brick or a bit of wood in until you've saturated the land in prayer for 40 days.
Interesting.
To cleanse it of all the evil thoughts and idioms, influences.
Yes.
Heal the land.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a very important part
So
of
that's
our
what
work.
happened. So he came from Iona to Lindisfarne with a team of 12,
Yeah,
and that was a faith-sharing team, but they also had practical skills as well, didn't they?
that's right. And then they recruited Saxon boys and then they built other monasteries and schools, and so it multiplied all over
Yeah.
the place.
Like, do you, like when you're listening to this, do you have thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I can just see I guess either accidentally or deliberately, I see that pattern repeated, and you know, I see that in kind of in mission, even in the church where I am, where there's this sort of desire for, I guess, how do we really see the kingdom of God modelled in a community,
Yes.
and how do we see the kingdom of God come in a community, and they go side by side, but prayer being the heartbeat at the
Yes.
centre of it all. And I can see also the way in which we can neglect, like you said, we go for the stuff that's visible and above the surface, the
Yeah.
external works,
Yeah.
or the activity,
Yes.
and we can shortcut or overlook the stuff that happens beneath the
Yes.
surface to our
Yes.
detriment,
Yes.
and get somewhere down the road and realise, oh, it feels like we're no longer really doing the things God called us to do. We're busy.
Yeah, because you're being, the pressures to perform in a certain way rob you of the call of God that's upon you, as even as a unique person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I suppose Aidan was authentic then,
Yes.
and his way of life had certain markers that became essential to him.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
And the other big thing about him was he came with all men, and the Saxon culture was a very male, masculine culture, and they treated women badly. But in Ireland they'd had the spiritual foster mothers, and I intuit that Aidan felt that if there were parts of the Saxon psyche the men couldn't reach, to copy a beer advertisement, and that only the women could reach parts.
Interesting.
And he wanted to bring in spiritual foster mothers, and Hilda, Princess Hild, who was converted through the Roman mission, was absolutely enthralled by Aidan and his spirituality. And when he heard that she was going to France, where they got double monasteries for women and men, he was heartbroken. He sent her a message saying, "Your country needs you." And she started the first double monasteries for men and women. And you know,
And this is Hilda.
Hilda, but these started in England, France, after Columbanus's work, and Germany. And after they were destroyed, it was 1,000 years anywhere in Christendom before women led men and women again in the church.
Wow. Wow.
There was a real breakthrough there.
So there's something very, like, you know, this is historical stuff, but something very relevant, and almost like the spirit of the age needs this way of Aidan, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty convinced that God is doing something.
And of course, high church people, or Catholics and so on, believe in apostolic succession.
Yes.
And I once did a little exercise in our church, which have people of all backgrounds, a prayer circle, discerning who God was calling to come into the middle to be the leader, and laying hands in a line from Jesus downwards, you see. But the thing is that Aidan died of a broken heart, in my opinion, because the Christ-like leader of the Southern Kingdom, based at York, was assassinated by a half-Christian guy who was the ruler up here. I think Aidan was heartbroken. I think he had a heart attack. But we know that he died, but he died standing, praying, leaning against a buttress. And the guy who's written the book, The Man Who Gave His Horse to a Beggar, about Aidan, says that he is convinced it was because Aidan stood, even as he died, praying, that 40 miles away a teenager called Cuthbert saw angels taking his son to heaven, and was inspired to offer himself to life.
We talked about that yesterday, didn't we?
He was in the Lammermuir Hills. And I
So
think
this is a passing on of the baton.
passing on of the baton. And of course Aidan's name means flame.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, pass on the flame, like an Olympic torch.
Well, we could talk about this for a long time, clearly.
Sorry.
And, you know, there's a lot to learn and to process and to think about. So thank you, Aaron, for being with us in this one.
Thank you.
And Ray, you and I will continue this conversation. So hopefully
you,
you'll enjoy it and keep watching. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry for the hiccup.